you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3 and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Welcome back for Working Fans Presents Horror Business Episode 4. And this is the first horror business episode of 2022. In October, we always like to do some kind of Halloween themed episode. Our first year was the horror stories from wrestling. Last year, every week of October, I highlighted a different streaming service and the horror movies that they offered. This year, we are going to do 31 horror movies or more in 31 days. We're starting with a franchise that I didn't follow much as a kid. That is the Nightmare on Elm Street series, starring the iconic horror icon, Freddy Krueger. Now, this came out in 1984. The first movie ran 1 hour, 31 minutes, written and directed by Wes Craven. It had a budget of $1,800,000 estimated. Its opening weekend in the US and Canada was $1,271,000, and it opened on November 11th, 1984. In the US and Canada, it grossed $624,448. Worldwide, it grossed $25,685,134. Now, all my facts come from IMDb and a little bit of other research I did. Quick breakdown of the movie. Teenager Nancy Thompson must uncover the dark truth concealed by her parents after she and her friends become targets of the spirit of a serial killer with a bladed glove in their dreams. And in their dreams, if they die, it kills them in real life. Now, this is a very interesting concept for a movie. And as a kid growing up, I heard a lot. Now, watching it as I got older, it just fits the slasher movie. You set up a group of kids, they get killed off one by one. And I think the real draw sometimes of the movie is the different deaths. And I'm not going to ruin the ending for you, but the big kind of conflict for Nancy to overcome is, can she destroy Freddy? As the movies go on, that premise gets a little thinner. But in this movie, I thought it was done so well. They don't show Freddy a lot. He's really menacing. Now, the major actors in this movie, Heather Langenkamp plays Nancy Thompson. Johnny Depp plays Glenn Lance, her boyfriend. Robert Englund stars as the enigmatic Fred Krueger. John Saxon, who you might remember from as Roper from Enter the Dragon, plays Nancy's father, Lieutenant Thompson. Lynn Shay plays the teacher, and you will recognize her from horror movies all throughout the years. Very memorable face. Ronnie Blakely plays Marge Thompson, who I think she does a good job as Nancy's mom. And Amanda Weiss, WYSS, plays Tina Gray. And The movie just starts out with Tina or all these kids being kind of bothered in their dreams, and they get together because it's a common theme that nobody wants to sleep. And then slowly they start getting killed off one by one, and it's a big mystery to them. A lot of the movie is what's killing them. And then about 3/4 of the way through the movie, Nancy's mom tells her about the story of Fred Krueger, how he was a child murderer. He got off on a technicality, and then all the parents conspired together to burn him in fire. And you can, from a human standpoint, you can understand that. But in the terms of this movie, I don't know why you wouldn't tell Nancy or put it together quicker. But, that's neither here nor there. But once they figure it out, Nancy devises a way to try and get at Freddy, and is one of like the few sole survivors of this movie. And slasher films usually have that one or two people that make it out. Now on IMDb, this got a rating of 7.4 out of 10. If you buy this on the Apple Store, there are 3 alternate endings: a scary ending, a happy ending, and a Freddy ending. Kind of variables of the actual ending of the movie. I preferred the Freddy ending the best. I definitely recommend going to check it out. Now, I enjoyed the movie. I thought the ending fell flat a little bit, but otherwise it had the perfect 80s horror movie feel. I like that Freddy was shown sparingly, just kind of to elicit that little bit of fear from you, and you see him during the kills mostly. Hour and a half is a great runtime. We talk about that a lot on this podcast, where the older movies, the shorter runtime just makes it far more enjoyable. And I thought it was a great way to kick off the franchise. Now, I'm going to do the reads that we usually do at the top of the show here to break up these shows a little bit, because I'm going to end every show with some fun facts that I got from IMDb. So before we get to the fun facts, as always, we are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1 and Lance by Chance, written by Vinnie Barry, available at WrestleVille.com. All the books I'm about to read after this are available on Amazon.com. And I'll highlight the authors as I go. Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. I'll Be Here All Week. And All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his comedy special, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik, as well as How Not to Suck at Comedy by Pat Oates. Blood and Fire is written by Brian R. Solomon. We are brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records, our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling, and by the book Matt Memories, My Wild Life in Pro Wrestling, Country Music, and with the New York Mets, written by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. All great books. Go check them out. But I got some great fun facts for you. New Line Cinema was saved from bankruptcy by the success of the film and was jokingly named the house that Freddy built. This is not surprising. As we go on in this series, you're going to see that it might overstay its welcome by, I would say, 2-3 movies, but it brought in a lot of money for the company, and ultimately that's why a lot of shows or movies get made. Heather Langenkamp beat over 200 actresses for the role of Nancy Thompson, amongst them Jennifer Grey, Demi Moore, Courtney Cox, Tracy Gold, and Claudia Wells. It'd be interesting to see how the role of Nancy would have been handled by another actress, but I thought that Heather did a great job. All the boiler room footage in the film was shot in the basement of the Lincoln Heights jail in Los Angeles, which was condemned shortly after production due to high levels of asbestos. Hopefully, all the cast and crew made it out with as little health issues as possible. This was the film debut of Johnny Depp, and we're going to see that for a couple actors, that this series was their first big break. And Johnny Depp also went on to make a cameo in a later film. Now, Wes Craven first came up with the basic idea for the movie from a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times over a 3-year period about a group of Southeast Asian refugees from the Hmong tribe, HMONG, several of whom died in the throes of horrific nightmares. The group had come to the U.S. to escape the murderous reign of Pol Pot, and within a year of arriving, 3 men had died, all in similar situations. They were young, otherwise healthy men who they would have nightmares and then refuse to sleep as long as they could. When they finally fell asleep due to exhaustion, they would wake up screaming and then died. Autopsy results revealed that they had not died from heart failure, but just simply died. It was this inability to find a cause of death that intrigued Craven so much. Medical authorities have since called this phenomenon Asian death syndrome, a variant of sudden unexpected death syndrome, and Brugda syndrome, Brugda syndrome. I thought it was interesting where the idea for this horror movie came from, because sometimes when you see these movies, you think, how did someone come up with such a wild plot? And sometimes there's a basis in truth. I would definitely recommend this first movie and get into the series. It's October 1st. You have 31 days to get in as many horror movies as you can. So this is a great way to start. And like I said, throughout this series, I'm going to bring you more movies, some you've heard of, some you might not have seen. And it's not like a real in-depth review. I'll give you basic breakdown, some facts about it, and then whether you should check it out or not. So happy Halloween, guys. And
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you, because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
welcome back for Working Fans Presents Horror Business Episode 5, where today we will be covering A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. This movie runs an hour and 27 minutes. It's from 1985, so it comes out a year after the original. It's directed by Jack Shoulder, also rated R. Wes Craven did stay on as a writer. He just wrote characters, it says. Now, you could tell that this movie was making money for the studio because the budget went up from $1,800,000 to it is $3 million on Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, estimated. Its opening weekend did $2,865,475, and it opened November 3rd, 1985. This grossed $29,999,213 both in the US and Canada and worldwide. Now, the idea of this movie is a new family moves into the house on Elm Street, and before long, the son is having nightmares about deceased child murderer Freddy Krueger. This time, Freddy attempts to possess a teenage boy to cause havoc in the real world and can only be overcome if the boy's sweetheart can master her fear. So it's a sequel of sorts, but it's just a new family moving into the house. And I enjoyed the idea of, is it kind of like a haunted house or possession type thing? So a different almost type of scary movie, I thought. And it felt like a sequel, but I'm going to say not a true sequel because we will have that for another movie coming up in this. But major actors in the movie, Robert Englund comes back as Fred Krueger. Oh, let's put up that graphic. So this is a Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Still getting the format of this down. And Mark Patton plays Jesse Walsh, the lead male in this. Kim Myers plays Lisa Weber. Rob Russler plays Ron Grady. Clu Gulager is Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh. Hope Lang is Mrs. Walsh. And Marshall Bell is Coach Snyder. You can see I practiced those names before I read them. This got an IMDb rating of 5.4 out of 10. And I like the first one more. This one wasn't bad. Like, as it was going on, I was trying to get into it because one of the problems I had with the series is in the story, Fred Krueger is killed in a factory. That's where the family burns him. But in the first movie, the mom goes down to like a old boiler or like furnace to pull out the hidden glove. And then it would seem that Fred is attached to the house, maybe. So that part was kind of like trying to figure out where the story's going. And then in the first one, he just dealt with terrorizing people in their dreams. And now he's trying to make it out into the real world. So it makes sense story-wise, but it's also a little confusing. Now, before we get to the fun facts at the end of this, some thoughts I had on this. I spent like I said, a bit trying to figure out what the movie was. Is it Freddy Krueger trying to possess somebody to get kills? Or is it more of a haunted house where he's attached to the house and anybody that moves in there gets the trouble of it? That's in this one, it's kind of that because, oh, you're the family that moved into that house where that thing happened. Like I said, starts in dreams, then goes to the real life. The male spin on the protagonist is interesting. They have not jumped the shark on using Freddy yet. He's still used sparingly in the movie. I like the first one a little bit better than this, like I said before. And Mark Patton looks like Michael J. Fox's stunt double. Now, like we did in the first episode, we're going to get to our reads in the middle here before we drop the fun facts on you that I found on IMDb. As always, these reviews are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1 and Lance by Chance, written by Vinny Berry, available at WrestleVille.com. And all the following books that I'm about to list off here are available on Amazon.com, including Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. I'll Be Here All Week, and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his comedy special. Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik, written by Brian R. Solomon. How Not to Suck at Comedy, written by Pat Oates. Matt Memories, written by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. The Great People, over at Connecticut People Records. And our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling. Go check out New Heights Wrestling on their YouTube page. They're just putting up the newest round of footage we did, and it might be our best calls as of late. And hopefully we'll be getting some footage from the Fright Nights that are going on down in Florida at the moment. Now, fun facts about the movie. In the opening sequence, the bus driver is Robert Englund without the makeup. This is the only Nightmare film in which the lead character is male, and it was an interesting twist on it. I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed it. It doesn't make it any different whether Freddy's going after like a male lead or a female lead, because there's always going to be a group of kids that are going to be hunted down. I thought this guy held down the role well. Now, New Line Cinema originally didn't ask Robert Englund to return as Freddy Krueger and refused to give him a pay raise. A stuntman was cast as Freddy at the start of production. And after 2 weeks of filming, Robert Shea, the producer, realized this was a terrible lapse in judgment, fired the stuntman, hired Englund, and met his demands. And it's kind of weird to think that on the second Freddy movie, they would have gone with a separate actor to play Freddy. But sometimes you might not know how big the movie gets. You might think you can put anybody in the makeup and, lower your cost. But Englund just did that role so well and came to mean so much that I'm glad they didn't switch it up from there. Now, makeup effects artist Kevin Yeager replaced David B. Miller, who designed the Freddy makeup for the original. Yeager only had a few pictures in the original film as reference, so he redesigned Freddy's look. Studying pictures of burn victims, he made changes to Freddy's look, namely by bringing out the facial bones. He said his intent was to make Freddy look like a male witch and gave Freddy red and amber eyes to make him look more demonic looking, which really helped with it because I think you needed to make Freddy scarier, because as the series would go on, they'd make him funny with his kills, which isn't bad, but for a horror movie lead, you want him to be scary. And in these early films, I would say he was. Now, Michael J. Fox was considered for the role of Jesse Walsh, but was unable due to his commitments to Back to the Future, which filmed in 1985, as well as Teen Wolf. So if Michael J. Fox was in this movie, think about it. He would have been in Teen Wolf, Back to the Future, and A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, all in the same year. This guy had a monstrous movie career as it was, but could it have brought this movie to the next level? Who knows? Now, rather than continue the story of the first film, Sole Survivor Nancy, this movie focuses on the new residents of Nancy's old Elm Street house, joining a grand tradition of horror sequels which ignore the survivors of the prior installment for what would appear to be cost-controlled reasons. Langenkamp told the Never Sleep Again documentary that she was never actually offered a chance to do the movie, and the film's line producer couldn't recall if there was ever actually been any internal discussions at New Line about bringing her back. It's been hypothesized that the concept of Freddy possessing someone in the real world versus killing them in dreams, and that was so different from the idea of the original that bringing Nancy back wouldn't have made sense. And I can see that, but you brought her back for so many other ones. So I feel like what they wanted to do with Freddy is what they did with Nancy in this one. And this guy filled a good hole. Like, I would recommend this movie, but I would recommend it saying, check the first one out first and then watch this. It's not a bad movie, but the first one was so good that it's kind of like, why make changes to it? Like, if you want to make changes, do it further down the road. And tomorrow we're going to get into A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, which that is Dream Warriors. And we will talk about the changes the series made then and kind of where they might have diverged and where they might have gotten back on track. So thank you for joining us for Horror Business episode 5, and we will see you again tomorrow. Now we are 3 days into October, 3 movies into the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but we are 6 episodes into Working Fans Presents Horror Business. So this is Working Fans Presents Horror Business, episode 6, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. And that's a lot of talking just to get to how you guys doing today. Are you ready for Halloween? Now, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors runs 1 hour, 36 minutes, which it's a little longer than the other ones, but still falls within that hour and a half range that we enjoy for those older movies. The director is Chuck Russell, with Wes Craven helping to write the story, Bruce Wagner helping to write the story, Frank Darabont helping to write the screenplay. This came out in 1987. It's also rated R. And the budget for this one is $4,500,000 estimated. It pulled an opening weekend in the US and Canada of $8,880,555, coming out March 1st, 1987. This grossed $44,793,222 in the US and Canada and worldwide. Now, this movie picks up where the original left off. Nancy has grown up and become a psychiatrist specializing in dream therapy. She meets a group of children at a local hospital facing Freddy Krueger, the same demon she once encountered in her sleep. One of them is Kristen, who has the power to draw other people into her dreams. Working with a male doctor assigned to the case, Nancy helps the kids realize their special abilities within the nightmare world. When Freddy captures one of her charges, she leads a rescue attempt into Krueger's domain in hopes of putting his spirit to rest once and for all. So, where the last movie was a sequel and I thought was a pretty good sequel, this is more like the spiritual successor to Nightmare on Elm Street. We're bringing back Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson. Robert Englund comes back as Freddy Krueger. Craig Wasson is Neil Gordon, the male doctor, who bears a huge resemblance to Bill Maher, I think, throughout the movie. Patricia Arquette plays Kristen Parker, the teen that can pull other people into her dreams. Ken Sagoes is Kincaid. Rodney Eastman is Joe. Jennifer Rubin is Taryn. Lawrence Fishburne plays Max. And John Saxon returns as Lieutenant Thompson. Now, a lot of bigger actors in this, and I would say up until this point, this might be my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie so far. Like, I really like the original. The second one I enjoyed as a sequel, but I spent too much time as a viewer trying to figure out what type of movie it was. And in this one, you're bringing back Nancy. She has used the trauma in her life to pursue this. And she is almost like the right person to be in this position. And as you can see through forces in the movie, people kind of like push back against it. Neil Gordon is eventually on her side. And it's basically them helping the kids through this movie. This movie got an IMDb rating of 6.6 out of 10. And I try and say it every movie, but I get all this information from IMDb. So this is the second highest rated Nightmare on Elm Street movie so far. Now, some of my thoughts from this movie. Kincaid was quite possibly one of my favorite characters in this. And one line he had is, "Oh, great, now it's my dick that's killing me." It was during a group therapy session. I really like the inclusion of Nancy. I thought that helped this movie fit into the series. And after not featuring her in the last one, I'm not going to say she needed to be in this to bring it around, but it definitely helped. Now, Kincaid, favorite character by far. is this movie is when I started wondering, is this when Freddy started getting funny? Because he always had some good one-liners, but I think this is where his comedy started getting pushed to the forefront more. Now, Dokken did a movie for the soundtrack, Dream Warriors, but Into the Fire was included in this movie. And I really like that because the first 2 seasons that the National Wrestling Alliance came back, they used that as their theme song. And for some reason, Into the Fire just has that perfect 80s feel. Better sequel than the second one. You're finally getting a little more of Freddy's backstory in this. And that's something that'll continue throughout the movies. And just when I think these movies are kind of getting a little long in the tooth, and I don't know if I put up this graphic yet, but we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. Just when I think this series is kind of getting like a little played out, they give you a little bit more of Freddy's story, and that kind of pulls me in more. Now, I'm enjoying the movies, even though this one is better. I am ready for a break. I shouldn't have watched these all in like a 4 or 5 night period because this is when I started to feel some burnout. But like I said, I'll get tired. Then they'll do something that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm back in. Once again, movie keeps up a perfect 80s vibe. Joey finally speaking and saving everyone was a great ending for this movie. And then Nancy, the nun mother reveal of Freddy's mom, I thought it was great. I would definitely recommend this movie so far. And let's get to these reads real quick before I get to the fun facts I found on IMDb. Now, we are brought to you, as always, by the Pro Wrestling Vault, Volume 1, and Lance by Chance, written by Vinnie Barry, available at Wrestleville.com. And all of the following books can be found on Amazon, including Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. I'll Be Here All Week, and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his comedy special. Brian R. Solomon's book, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik. Pat Oates' book, How Not to Suck at Comedy. And John Arezzi's book, Matt Memories, all available on Amazon. We are brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records. And check out our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling. Now, getting back to the movie, some fun facts. On the VHS release, the music video for Dokken's Dream Warriors appears after the credits. The video contains many scenes from the movie and ends when the band vanquishes Freddy, causing him to wake up from his nightmare and ask, who are those guys? So, very interesting idea for a music video, I think. Ken Sagos Kincaid stated in an interview he didn't really want to audition for the role of Kincaid, but his agent talked him into going. On the day of the audition, he walked in heavy rain to catch a bus to the location. He showed up completely drenched and had to sit in and wait for a few hours due to the auditions running late. When it was his turn, director Chuck Russell told him to do whatever he wanted to do. Sagos was so frustrated and mad about the whole ordeal, he yelled, "Fuck you," and then proceeded to scream and curse out Russell. Russell hires him immediately. That'll give you an idea of Kincaid throughout the movie, and he definitely makes it. It's worth checking out. Now, there's a dream sequence in the movie in which Dick Cavett interview is interrupted by Freddy. Sally Kellerman was originally in the script as the guest, but Cavett was then allowed to pick the person he'd be interviewing. He picked Zsa Zsa Gabor because he thought she was the dumbest person he'd ever met, and he'd never have her on the show in real life. So if there was one person he'd want to see killed by Freddy, it would be her. I thought that was an interesting little fact. Now, like I said, I like this movie by far, and this was probably the last movie in the series for a little bit that I really enjoyed, because the next couple, they're going to be rough, but I wanted to start out this season of Horror Business for 2022 with a series, and then we're going to jump around into some single movies, some original movies, and some remakes. But coming up tomorrow, we have Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream Master. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Horror Business, and we will see you again tomorrow to talk.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
It's Tuesday night, and you know what that means. That means Working Fans presents Horror Business Episode 7, Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream Master. And as you know, we've been covering the Nightmare on Elm Street series so far to start off October, and we're into the 4th movie. So Dream Master runs 1 hour, 33 minutes, directed by Denny Harlan. It's from 1988, rated R. This movie had a budget of $13 million. US and Canada opening weekend was $12,833,403. Opened on August 21st, 1988. Now, both worldwide and in the US and Canada, this film grossed $49,369,899. So it's obvious why it's profitable for the studio to push forward with this. But by 4, I was definitely feeling burnt out on the series. Now, this also follows along in the story, following up the previous Nightmare film. The dream demon, Freddy Krueger, is resurrected from his apparent demise and rapidly tracks down and kills all 3 of the surviving Elm Street kids. However, Kristen Parker, who has the ability to draw others into her dreams, wills her special ability to her new best friend, Alice Johnson, before her demise. Afterwards, she soon realizes that Freddy is taking advantage of that unknown power she now wields to pull a new group of teenage children into his foul domain. Can Alice embrace her new power to finally defeat Freddy, or is it already too late? Now, Patricia Arquette didn't return for the role of Kristen, and the other kids from the previous movie get killed off fairly quick. And you can tell that they're trying to find ways to give this story legs now. The major actors in this movie, Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger, John Beckman is Coach, Brooke Bundy is Elaine, Hope Marie Carlton is the pinup girl, Dwayne Davis, Jock, Rodney Eastman is Joey Eastman, Keisha Brackell is Friend. You got Tuesday Night plays Kristen. Richard Garrison plays the doctor. Kristen Clayton plays the little girl. And this was the 4th Nightmare on Elm Street movie I watched. And I watched them in a row because I wanted to kind of take them in as a whole. And this movie got an IMDb rating of 5.6 out of 10. So it's definitely gone downhill as it's gone. But like I said, it really, each movie they go on, it's profitable for them and they get to tell a new little piece of that Freddy Krueger story. Now, this is the second movie to start with a quote about sleep on the screen. And between 3 and 4, it seems like they decided to start tying music into their intro. So you're getting more popular music of the day, helping round out that 80s feel. The children of Elm Street, or like the 14s that get killed, and the house seem to be becoming staples of the series. After the last movie, it's kind of like, where did they go? Because the last one, they made it a point to bury Freddy, thinking that's what would finally kill him. And in this, a dog pisses in a graveyard and resurrects Freddy, obviously. They lean in on the cigarettes to mask the change of actors. I took that as a nope. No idea what that means. I believe Kristen in the film was like a heavy cigarette smoker. So that's the way that, even though the actress visually looks different, you see her smoking, so you know it's the same. And I made a note to the side, how does Freddy keep coming back? Because in each movie, the goal is to defeat Freddy. And they do, but for the next movie, there's always something different that brings him back. So I think, like, thinking about that too, I'm like, where does the series go? I kind of felt like burnt out, not quite done with the series, but not quite digging it as much as I had 1 and 2. Now, like I said, there's always little things they add to it, but a little thing we add is, we are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1 and Lance by Chance, written by Vinnie Berry, available at WrestleVille.com. And all the following books I'm going to list are available on Amazon.com, including Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. Another friend of the show, Ward Anderson, wrote I'll Be Here All Week and All That's Left, as well as his comedy special being available on Amazon. Former guest of the show, Brian R. Solomon, wrote Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik. Pat Oates wrote How Not to Suck at Comedy. John Arezzi wrote Matt Memories with Greg Oliver. The great people at Connecticut People Records bring us to you. If you're an artist looking for studio time, get a hold of Connecticut People Records and they will hook you up. And our wrestling home of New Heights Wrestling. Check out their YouTube page. Within the last couple weeks, they've started dropping the newest round of footage that Dave and I called. There's an amazing Lindsay Snow match in there. You got a couple great tag team matches. Just check out New Heights Wrestling in general. They're great. But getting back to Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream Master, let's get to those fun facts that people are loving so much. This is the first film in the franchise where Robert Englund received top billing in the opening credits, which is a little crazy considering he's kind of the title character, not necessarily by name, but he is the main focus. He is the Nightmare on Elm Street. The name of the diner where Alice works is called the Craven, reference to franchise creator Wes Craven. This was the highest grossing entry in the Nightmare on Elm Street film franchise, not counting Freddy vs. Jason. This earned $49 million in the US. This is Robert Englund's favorite movie of the series. Not only did Tuesday Night co-star in the film, she performed the theme song that you heard in the beginning. Highest grossing horror movie of 1988. That's saying something. The budget is $13 million, making it the most expensive Nightmare on Elm Street film at the time, until it got surpassed by Freddy vs. Jason with a budget of $25 million. This is the only film in the franchise to have an original song in the opening credits. The second half of the Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors credits feature Into the Fire by Dokken, and Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare would open with I'm Awake Now by the Goo Goo Dolls, and the first to have a rap song in the ending credits. The first film in the franchise in which the credits roll instead of appearing in a slideshow. Now, while I was down on this movie, I would recommend it because it's not the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but not the worst. And there's bits of these movies where you could get bored with it. The idea of Freddy coming alive again and attacking a new round of teenagers can be boring. But like I said, they do add those little bits of his character to flesh out more of Freddy's history. So you get to know more about him going on. And in these movies, they always refer to him as a child killer, but it almost has the feel of a child molester. I believe he was supposed to be a molester at the beginning. They changed it into a killer, which it's fine. Either way, it's very dark subject matter and makes him a huge villain. And you can see why he's one of the modern horror villains. Let us know in the comments, who's your favorite modern horror villain? Is it Jason, Freddy, Mike Myers? Is it someone else? Let us know. And we're going to come back to you on tomorrow night, Wednesday night, with Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And Friday, we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Saturday, Freddy versus Jason. And then on Sunday, we're going to be doing our last Nightmare on Elm Street movie with the remake. As of this recording, I have not watched that yet. And I'm excited for that one because there's been some time after the series before that one comes out. So I'm interested to see how someone that's not Robert Englund has the take on Freddy Krueger. Do they make it darker? Because some of these modern horror remakes, you can get gorier than the originals and you can do things a little different. Halloween's been another good example, and we will probably be doing some Halloween reviews this month as well. But we're still working on the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Thank you for joining us, and I will be back again tomorrow night.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
It's Wednesday night, and I know you will be watching Dynamite in a couple hours, but thank you for tuning in now for Working Fans Presents Episode 8, Horror Business Episode 8, where we will be talking Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. This came out in 1989. also rated R. It's an hour and 29 minutes, directed by Stephen Hopkins. It had an estimated $6 million budget, and its opening weekend in US and Canada was $8,115,176, opening on August 13th, 1989. It had a gross both in US and Canada and worldwide of $22,168,359. Now, in this movie, Alice, having survived the previous installment of the Nightmare series, finds the deadly dreams of Freddy Krueger starting once again. Now, remember, Alice is the friend that got the ability to pull people into her dreams from her friend Kristen in the previous movie. This time, the taunting murderer is striking through the sleeping mind of Alice's unborn child. His intention is to be born again into the real world. The only one who can stop Freddy is his dead mother, but can Alice free her spirit in time to save her own son? That is a lot right there. Like, I've been talking about how I've kind of been getting tired on the series because I watched all of them in a row. And I think it's a good plot, but there's like levels to it, and it's a little convoluted. It's getting a little more finding reasons to bring Freddy into the real world, and it we'll get into what I thought about the movie later. Now, major actors: Robert Englund, of course, returning as Freddy Krueger. You have Lisa Wilcox as Alice, Kelly Jo Minter as Yvonne, Danny Hassel as Dan, Erica Anderson as Greta, Nicholas Melee, Dennis Johnson, Joe Seeley plays Mark, Valerie Armstrong is Mrs. Jordan, Bird Benning is Mr. Jordan, Clarence Felder is Mr. Gray, Gurney Orderly is Michael Ashton, and we're getting deep into the cast there. Now, Beatrice Bopel is Amanda Kruger, and they're starting to work Freddy's daughter into the mix. This might be the first one where she shows up. Some of these details are a little jumbled because, like I said, I didn't grow up on the series, and I wanted to start this year's edition of Horror Business with the series and then kind of get into horror movies here and there, and then maybe do originals and remakes. Never having seen this series, I started with this. This had an IMDb rating of 5 out of 10, and I thought this movie just felt unnecessary in the series. Very forgettable, besides the story thread with Krueger's mother, because that's another kind of layer to it. You find out she was this nun that was raped by like 1,000 maniacs, and that is a awful like movie thread to go on, but that's how they got that's where they went with that storyline. Now, I feel they should have maybe stopped this series like a movie ago, because it's starting to just really feel too much at this point. It's the 5th one in the series. I like how every movie poster looks. I like the 80s feel of it. But like with this one, you're just trying to find another way to get Freddy into the world, and I wasn't terribly crazy about this. Now, I'm always trying to get in our reads because we are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1 and Lance by Chance, written by Vinnie Barry, available at WrestleVille.com. All the following books can be gotten on Amazon, being Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton, 2 great novels, as well as I'll Be Here All Week and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his stand-up special. Former guest of the show, Brian R. Solomon, wrote Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik. Pat Oates wrote How Not to Suck at Comedy. And John Arezzi with Greg Oliver wrote Matt Memories. We're brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records and our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling. And getting back to A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, we're going to bring you some fun facts. This is the second and last time the character of Amanda Kruger, sister Mary Helena, appears in the film series. Her first appearance was in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. I forgot Amanda Kruger was Freddy's mom and not his daughter as depicted in the next movie. Stephen King and comic book writer Frank Miller were offered the job of writing and directing this movie, but didn't end up taking it. I think a Stephen King take on Freddy Krueger would be very interesting. And from what we've seen of later Frank Miller movies, this could have been a very interesting direction to go with it. Now, executive producer Sarah Reicher's original pitch to New Line Cinema for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors was for Freddy to have a baby. Reicher states, I went in, one of the executives was pregnant at the time, and I said, picture Freddy clawing his way out of the womb. No one liked my idea. So then I got a call for Nightmare 5, and when they came to me, they said, remember when you wanted Freddy to have a baby? Well, we like that idea now. What if Alice was the mom? This is the final Nightmare on Elm Street film until Freddy vs. Jason to feature the Jump Rope Kids singing Freddy's rhyme. That has been a staple of the series. Almost when you know you're in the dream world, when you see the girls skipping rope and singing the rhyme. Unlike the previous films, with the exception of the first, this film's main titles do not display the digit 5, just A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Child. When you get deep enough into the series, I'm sure that you want to maybe take the number away so it doesn't feel like you're in the 5th movie in the series. Because when you see that number, you could get mentally tired of it. If you just see a different Nightmare on Elm Street, you could say, what is this? So not the worst idea. Vince McMahon did it for a while with WrestleManias. The laughter heard at the end, right before the credits roll, is a clip of Vincent Price laughing at the end of Michael Jackson's song Thriller. Price's laughter is sampled at the beginning of Kool Moe Dee's song Let's Go, which is played during the film's end credits. And that song, Let's Go by Kool Moe Dee, was actually a diss track to LL Cool J. The two rappers were feuding at the time the film was being made. So it's interesting to see this rap diss song get included in the Freddy series. In France, the movie was named Freddy 5, The Nightmare Child. And in Germany, the movie was named A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Trauma. I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend this, and little would neither Thor here. If you want to take in the whole series and get the whole story as it goes, sure, go check it out. But I wouldn't say this film is necessary. Now, tomorrow we're going to be returning with Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And after that, we have 3 more movies before being done with Freddy. And then starting Monday next week, we'll have Twilight Zone, the movie. Big Twilight Zone fan of the. But I mean, like I said yesterday, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake is probably the film in this series I'm most excited about. So join us tomorrow for Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and we will continue on with the series.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Business episode 9, where I will be talking the third to last the fourth to last Freddy movie that I plan to be covering. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. This movie is an hour and 29 minutes, directed by it came out in 1991 at a budget of around $11 million. Its opening weekend in US and Canada was $12,966,525, coming out on September 15th, 1991. Now, the gross in both US and Canada and worldwide is $34,872,033. So you can see financially it was worth them to continue the series on. But in this movie, and definitely in the next one, I'll be talking about where the film starts to feel more tired to me. Now, in part 6 of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, dream monster Freddy Krueger has finally killed all the children of his home and seeks to escape its confines to hunt for fresh. To this end, he recruits the aid of his previously unmentioned daughter. However, she discovers the demonic origin of her father's powers and meets him head on in a major actors in this movie. Robert Englund comes back as Freddy. Lisa Zane stars as his daughter. Sean Greenblatt is John Doe. Leslie Dean is Tracy. Ricky Dean Logan is Carlos. Breckin Meyer is Spencer. Yaphet Kotto is Doc. Tom Arnold plays the childless man. Roseanne Barr plays the childless woman. And that's from a scene where they go to this town where John Doe is from, and there's no kids in this hometown, and all the people seem like, kind of, I don't know, not obsessed with the kids, but intrigued by them. But they also say they're what brings Freddy. So this movie got a 4.7 out of 10. It was a good enough movie, but I was getting tired by this point. I've been going in waves. I mentioned it the last couple movies where I get tired of the movies. Then there's a facet of the story that gives you a little more on Freddy's character, so it gets interesting. At this point, the series really feels like it's overstaying its welcome. And what's not overstaying its welcome is the reads that we always try and get in, because we are brought to you by Barry, available at wrestleville.com. On amazon.com, you can get all of the following books, including Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. I'll Be Here All Week and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his stand-up special. Former guest of the show, Brian R. Solomon's book, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik. Pat Oates' book, How Not to Suck at Comedy. Trying to get the graphic up here. It is also available on Amazon, as well as Map Memories by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. We are brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records. And check out our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling. Now, despite having a couple technical difficulties today, we're not having difficulty with the fun facts brought to you by IMDb. Peter Jackson was originally hired to write the screenplay for this film. He wrote a draft, but it wasn't used. He later went on to become big for the Lord of the Rings films. That original screenplay saw Freddy aging and growing weak within the dream world. The teens of Springwood would have drug-fueled slumber parties for kicks and enter the dream world to beat him up. This is the first Nightmare on Elm Street film to not end in a cliffhanger. Although the movie is said to be the final installment of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, Robert Englund would return as the iconic horror antagonist again for a new Nightmare, which is the next movie we will be covering, and played the role one last time in Freddy vs. Jason, which will be Saturday's release here. Now, this was Breckin Meyer's first theatrical role. Alice Cooper has an uncredited role as Freddy's father. And he previously co-wrote and performed the theme song for Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Both that film and this film are the 6 films in the series. This was the 4th highest grossing film in the series. During Tracy's dream sequence, the band Sepultura's name can be seen underneath the mirror as she leans down to wash her face. Huge fan of Sepultura, so I was glad to see that in there. This is the first Nightmare on Elm Street film to not have the words Elm Street in the title. This trend would continue for the rest of the series, not counting the remake, which we will be covering Sunday. And I talked about it yesterday. Very excited to cover that for you guys because I've been feeling burnt out on the series, and I feel like that's going to be a modern remake, a modern take on it. This is the first film in the series to not include the little girls jumping rope singing Freddy's rhyme, the thing that would happen a lot in Nightmares. On September 12th, 1991, a day before the U.S. release of this movie, Los Angeles declared it Freddy Krueger Day. This was 6 films into the series, so, he had gotten to be an icon at that point and got rewarded with a day. And this was the highest opening weekend of the series until the release of Freddy vs. Jason. I'm sorry that these last couple Freddy reviews have been they've been a little more lackluster and just not filled with the excitement that I had at the beginning because, like I said, marathon them all, and it started to feel like a bit much. Probably would have been a good idea to break them up, but not knowing the series, I wanted to dive into it. And I hope to pick up the energy more when we're looking at, like, Monday, I'll be covering The Twilight Zone, so that'll be a single film. Tuesday, I'm going to be doing The Ring, and Wednesday, The Ring 2. So it's going to be doing another series there. Thursday, we'll be doing Rings. We've got the 2 Ouija movies, Friday and Saturday. And then starting Sunday the 16th, I've got The Hills Have Eyes originals. And then Monday the 17th, I'm going to do the remake. And I'm going to do that with a couple more films. We've got The Omen coming up on the 20th and 21st, doing the original and the remake. Doing the same with It on the 22nd and 23rd. And then we're going back to the Conjuring series through the 24th through the 26th. So stay with us. We're going to be bringing you definitely those set horror movies. And we're going to be having some extras thrown in there as well. And I am working on a big surprise for Halloween hoping to bring in a guest, talk their favorite horror movie. Details about that will be released going forward. So thank you for putting up with the process of this, because ever since we started the Working Fans podcast, it's mainly pro wrestling, MMA, and comedy. But then there's also things where we've wanted to branch out, and this was an experiment. Can we do a video release every day of October featuring a different movie? Obviously, things could be worked in that plan, but I think it's been going well. And, you've been along with us for the ride. So come back tomorrow. Friday, we'll close out the week with Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I will see you guys then.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you, because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
How's it going, everyone? Closing out this first work week of October. Today's the 7th. And today we will be talking Wes Craven's New Nightmare. After this movie, we have 2 more films left in the Freddy series. And if you've been keeping up with this series of videos of Working Fans Presents Horror Business Episode 10, you know that I'm a little burned out on the Freddy movies, and the idea of this one was interesting. Wes Craven's New Nightmare runs an hour and 52 minutes, so a little longer than I've been liking in this series, but it is directed by Wes Craven, so that's a nice return to form. Came out in 1994, rated R, had a budget of $8 million estimated. Its opening weekend in U.S. and Canada, they did $6,667,118, coming out October 16th of 1994. Now, in the U.S. and Canada, this grossed $90,181. Excuse me. Worldwide, it grossed $19,721,741. Now, in this movie, it's nearing the 10th anniversary of the film A Nightmare on Elm Street, and one of the stars, Heather Langenkamp, is being scared by a voice on a phone sounding very similar to the film's villain, Freddy Krueger. When Heather's husband is killed in a car accident and is discovered with slash marks on him, Heather starts to wonder something, especially when she discovers that Wes Craven is writing another Nightmare film. Soon she realizes that Freddy is now entered the real world, and the only way to defeat him is to become Nancy Thompson again. This movie, I don't have a ton of thoughts on because I wasn't crazy about it. The longer runtime I found my attention wandering during it. And I think the heart of the Freddy films is really in the first 3 and in that 80s feel. Now, the major actors in this, Heather Langenkamp plays Heather Langenkamp. Robert Englund plays himself. J.F. Davis plays Freddy's hand double. Mike Hughes plays Dylan. Matt Winston plays Chuck. Ron LaBelle Terry. David Newsom plays Chase Porter. Wes Craven plays himself. And, it's this weird film that tries bordering like a reality or trying to make it as real as possible. Interesting idea for the film. I just felt burnt out on the series. Didn't do too much for me. And I felt it was a little too long. Now, IMDb rated this 6.4 out of 10. So not the worst movie in the series. And I think the different take on Freddy is maybe what saved it. I would give this one a watch, but realize it's probably going to do more for you if you're more of a Freddy Krueger fan. And if you're a fan of the Working Fans podcast, then we are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault and Lance by Chance, both written by Vinny Barry, available at wrestleville.com. And all of the books I'm about to list off now are available on amazon.com if you get them, including Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. I'll be here all week, and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his stand-up special. Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik, the newest book by Brian R. Solomon. How Not to Suck at Comedy, written by Pat Oates, and Matt Memories, written by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. We're brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records. If you're an artist looking for studio time in the Connecticut, New York area, check them out. They are amazing. And check out our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling, where almost every week they're releasing footage, catch up on all their old footage. Especially watch the last year, since Bound and Determined 2021. Dave and I have been on board as the commentary team, but even watch before that. There's some great in-ring action. Now, some fun, interesting trivia from this. In the film, Freddy is depicted much closer to what Wes Craven had originally intended for the character. Much more menacing, much less comical, with an updated attire and appearance. However, in 2015, before his death, he would admit he regretted changing his appearance and said, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," which is why he kept Ghostface's mask the same in every Scream movie. I would say that the update was good. This Freddy needed something fresh at this point. Now, the events in this film revolve around Heather Langenkamp having a stalker. In real life, she did have a stalker, and Wes Craven got permission to use it or weave it into the story. Director Wes Craven had intended to ask Johnny Depp to make an appearance as himself in the funeral scene. Craven never worked up the courage to ask him, but after the films were released, they ran into each other. Craven asked Depp if he would have made an appearance in the movie, and Depp said that he would have, and that Craven should have asked him. That would have been an interesting cameo and bring it full circle, considering the first one was his first movie. Now, the basic premise of the film: Freddy invading the real world and haunting the actors and crew responsible for the movies, was originally intended to be used for Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, inspired by the movie Return to Horror High, but that idea was rejected by the studio at the time. The film has no opening titles to blur the illusion of whether it's a film, a documentary, or something else altogether. And this film did feel different. I'll give it credit for trying to be different and trying to get that last little bit of life out of this. But by this point, I am happy to be done with this series. Tomorrow, I'll be covering Freddy versus Jason. And then Sunday the 9th, we'll be doing the remake. And then we'll get into a whole new week of movies, starting with the Twilight Zone movie, moving on to the Ring movie, and then ending with the Ouija movie. So stay tuned to us for more horror movie reviews this October. We'll be doing 31 or more. And thank you again for joining us. Like I said, every October we try and do something different for horror movies and for Halloween. And this is this year's take on it. So thank you for joining us. And let us know your favorite horror movies in the comments. Have a good night.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Welcome back for another edition of Working Fans Presents Horror Business. We are 8 days in, Horror Business episode 11, and today we are talking about the 2003 movie Freddy vs. Jason. Now, this movie was hour and 37 minutes, directed by Ronnie Yu. It's another R rating, as most of these Nightmare on Elm Streets have been. It had a $30 million budget, and opening weekend in US and Canada brought in $36,400,000, and that opening weekend was August 17th, 2003. Now, the gross in US and Canada was $82,633,448, while the gross worldwide was $116,643,421. Now, in the movie, it's been nearly 10 years since Freddy Krueger terrorized people in their dreams, and the town folks want to keep it erased from their memory. Freddy still has one more plan on getting back to Elm Street. It's to resurrect Jason Voorhees, and he sends him off to kill. The more bodies which fall to the ground, the stronger Freddy becomes. This is until Freddy realizes that Jason isn't just going to step aside easily and must be taken down himself. Now, the major actors in this movie: Robert Englund returned as Freddy Krueger. Ken Kersinger was Jason Voorhees. Kelly Rowland played Kia Watterson, and that's Kelly Rowland from, I believe, Destiny's Child, early acting role for her. Monica Keena was Laurie Campbell. Jason Ritter was Will Rollins. Catherine Isabel played Gib. Christopher Rodriguez Marquette played Charlie Lindemann. Brendan Fletcher played Mark Davis. Tom Butler played Dr. Campbell. Lachlan Monroe played Deputy Scott something. I can't read the last name. Kyle LeBire played Bill Feinberg, and Zach Ward played Bobby Davis. Now, sorry for dropping some of those names there, but that was like, you didn't need that much of the cast. This was, I thought, a very fun movie. When the movie first came out, I really liked the soundtrack and just never made it around to seeing the movie. It was a fun movie, I thought, moved along quickly. And one thing I enjoyed was, having watched so many of these Freddy movies in a row, I think the fact that the movie featured a little more Jason might have been why I enjoyed it a little more. Now, on IMDb, this got rated 5.7 out of 10. And that's the first half of the show, kind of giving you a rundown. I would definitely recommend this movie. It's fun. It goes by quick. It's hour 37. That's getting into a slightly longer movie. Like, I like the hour and a half and under. This is approaching 2 hours, but it doesn't feel like it. Very good movie. If you want to find a starting point maybe to get into the series, I'd recommend this one. Now, you've been enjoying these Halloween episodes, and we couldn't do these without the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1 and Lance by Chance, written by Vinnie Barry. Both these books are available at wrestleville.com. Now, all the following books that I'm about to mention are available on amazon.com. And those include Super Vows and Pas de Deux, written by friend of the show, Kevin Kelton. Check out these books, 2 amazing novels, and check out the More Perfect Union podcast to hear more Kevin. I'll Be Here All Week and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his stand-up special. Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik, written by Brian R. Solomon. How Not to Suck at Comedy, written by Pat Oates. Matt Memories, written by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. We are brought to you by the great people over at Connecticut People Records. If you're in Connecticut, need studio time, get a hold of these guys and they will set you up. And we are brought to you by our wrestling commentary home of New Heights Wrestling. Now, if you've been watching these shows, you know I like to end with trivia on the end of them. Now, James Wan was originally going to direct this film, but was already committed to directing Saw, which came out in 2004, and was too busy with other film projects. So this would have been an interesting James Wan film. According to Robert Englund, his makeup was so thick that he couldn't tell how hot it was from the fires during the filming. And when he got in to have his makeup removed, it got bonded to his face. So that cannot be good, especially with who knows what it took to get it off. Standing at 6'5", Ken Kersinger is the tallest actor to date to play Jason Voorhees. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Now, the biggest problem that occurred on set was a fight between director Ronnie Yu and Catherine Isabel, who played Gib. Now, Isabel had signed on to the film with the promise that she wouldn't have to do nude scenes, as she has a strict no nude clause in her contract. Now, during the shoot, Yu went back on that promise and repeatedly tried to pressure her to get naked, according to IMDb. They eventually settled on using a body double. Now, the lake at Camp Crystal Lake was also being used to film the final scenes for X2 X-Men United at the same time this movie was being filmed. So the two cast even stayed at the same hotel. I don't know how often that happens. Betsy Palmer, who played Jason's mother in the original Friday the 13th, was asked to reprise her role of Mrs. Voorhees, but turned it down because she felt the role was too small for her. This was the first Freddy movie not filmed in the United States, and the filmmakers had to search for a new house that would resemble the famous Freddy Krueger Elm Street house from the first 7 movies. If I had to guess, I bet this was filmed in Canada. Now, Rob Zombie was also offered to direct this movie, but turned it down to work on his pet project, House of a Thousand Corpses, which we will be covering on October 19th. And the final fact I got for you today were there were plans for a crossover as early as 1987, but New Line Cinema and Paramount Pictures failed to agree on a story or what to do with the two series. Paramount Pictures had approached New Line Cinema about filming a crossover several years before, as the latter had gained the licensing rights to Friday the 13th. Negotiations on the project were never finalized, which led Paramount to make Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. So that was Freddy versus Jason. Let us know in the comments if you saw the movie, if you liked it. I recommended it. And after watching so many Nightmare on Elm Street movies, we are ending tomorrow with the Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 remake. And then Monday, we will be coming at you with Twilight Zone, the movie. So thank you again for tuning in. And I hope we're getting you in that Halloween spirit.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you, because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Welcome back for Working Fans Presents Horror Business, episode 12. And although the weekend's almost over, we are not done with Horror Business episodes. What we are done with is the Nightmare on Elm Street series, because today we are talking the Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 remake. Movie is an hour and 35 minutes, directed by Samuel Bayer. It came out in 2010 and it is rated R, as I think all the Nightmare on Elm Streets have been. It had a $35 million estimated budget, and its opening weekend in the US and Canada was $32,902,299. And that opening weekend was May 2nd, 2010. In the US and Canada, it grossed $63,075,011. The gross worldwide was $115,695,182. Now, the basic story for the movie is like any Nightmare on Elm Street. Death stalks the dreams of several young adults to claim its revenge on the killing of Freddy Krueger. Chastised by this finger-bladed demon, it is the awakening of old memories and denials of past of retribution that spurns this hellish vision of a dreamlike state and turns death into a nightmare reality. And basically, these kids that Freddy had victimized in real life had totally forgotten about him. And now that they're starting to have dreams about him and remember him, he's getting stronger and coming after them. Now, the major actors, Jackie Earle Haley played Freddy Krueger. Rooney Mara played Nancy Holbrook. Kyle Gallner played Quentin Smith, Katie Cassidy, Chris Fowles, and Thomas Decker played Jesse Brown. Now, I like this movie. I thought Jackie Earle Haley, the guy that played Rorschach, made a good Freddy Krueger. He looked different. He was very menacing. In this one, it was a little more overt that he was a child molester and not just a child killer. I think it was always kind of implied in those 80s movies, but maybe just back then they didn't want to be so out with it. But it was kind of like a crux of this movie. And I was very surprised that people didn't like this movie to the degree that they did because I thought it was great. IMDb gave it a 5.2 out of 10. And let me look at my notes here. Like the movie, dude that played Rorschach and Watchmen was a good Freddy. I enjoyed the familiarity of scenes from the original. I heard that was one thing they got kind of knocked for it because it was like they couldn't come up with original ideas. And I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but this felt much darker than the original. I thought it was a good movie. So I would definitely recommend it to you. If you were a fan of the original Nightmare on Elm Streets and did not see this, I think it'd be worth checking out. If you've never checked out a Nightmare on Elm Street, you could probably, if you want like an 80s horror movie vibe, I recommend the originals, but this was a good horror remake. And as always, these episodes are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault, Volume 1, written by Vinnie Berry, available at WrestleVille.com, where you can also get his first book, Lance by Chance, Wrestling is Yvonne Eric. And all the following books that I'm going to list off now are available on Amazon, including Super Vows and Potted Dib, both written by a friend of the show and my More Perfect Union podcast host, co-host Kevin Kelton. I'll Be Here All Week and All That's Left, written by Ward Anderson, as well as his stand-up special. Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik by Brian R. Solomon. How Not to Suck at Comedy by Pat Oates. Matt Memories by John Arezzi and Greg Oliver. If you're an artist in Connecticut and looking for studio time, check out the great people over at Connecticut People Records. And if you're on YouTube and looking for some entertainment, look for our wrestling commentary, home of New Heights Wrestling. And I'd like to think this is everybody's favorite part of the show, the trivia for movies. Now, let us know in the comments what you thought about this movie. Did you see it? Did you like it? Would you recommend it to someone else? Now, Freddy's sweater was knitted by Judy Graham, the same woman who knitted Freddy's sweater in the original Nightmare on Elm Street movies. That's a nice little prop thing. And if she knitted the original, she can probably do something close, maybe a little bit different. You can give insight. That was, I thought, a cool fact. Now, producer Brad Fuller has stated that while the film was a financial success, the backlash from fans, critics, and industry professionals alike was so great that the phones at Platinum Dunes didn't ring for 2 years. They wouldn't make a film until The Purge, which came out in 2013. He admits that this film was handled poorly and a step back for the company. It was decided that this would be their last horror remake. And I think that's really a shame because I like this movie. I didn't think it was really bad at all. Now, Wes Craven, having signed the sequel and franchise rights away when making the original just to get it financed, had no involvement with the remake. It was not even aware it was being made until well into production. Robert Englund gave his personal blessing to Jack Earl Haley to replace him as Freddy, saying the torch has well been passed. Rooney Mara hated being in this movie so much that she almost quit acting altogether. Jackie Earl Haley scratched his corneas with the contact lenses he wore, delaying production for a short time. He also had the whites of his eyes turn blood red for 2 weeks because of that. So imagine playing that horrific monster and then the actual costume, much like we heard with Robert Englund, having that effect on you. Now, this was originally intended to be a prequel movie, but that idea was dropped. And to pay as much homage and respect to Wes Craven's original film as possible, many iconic scenes from the original were reused. Unfortunately, this drew heavy criticism from critics and fans alike, who saw it as plagiarizing the original and demonstrating a lack of imagination. And I didn't think that was the case at all. I thought it gave you kind of like, you had that familiarity with the original movie. So you saw these things that you were aware of that you already connect with Freddy. And then on top of that, you have a new Freddy, a new way of filming. So I don't think that's unoriginal at all. Yeah, I think it's a way to, like they said, pay homage to it. Now, I'm done with this review and I am done with A Nightmare on Elm Street. I by no means hate the movies, but where they made 6, 7 of them, you could have gotten away with 2, 3, and you could have had like 2, 3 awesome movies. You'd have Freddy versus Jason and then the remake. So I'd have to say for Nightmare on Elm Street overall, I got to give it to the first 3. And Freddy versus Jason is my favorites that I've reviewed in this series. Now, thank you for making it to day 9 with us. It's Sunday. Work week starts back up tomorrow, and we will start back up tomorrow with Twilight Zone, the movie. I am very much looking forward to covering this, and I can't wait to talk about it with you.